In retrospect, I almost wish that Dishonored and Thief both had not been requested. I probably should restructure. Actually, I'll think about that. See, here's the thing: Dishonored is modern Thief. It is. There's no arguing that. That became so apparent when I actually played through Dishonored and when I replayed through Thief for this rumination. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but the problem is a lot of the points I can make about Thief, I already have. I already made those points about Dishonored. They apply almost one to one in many cases. Now, some people are going to argue which is the better game, and I'm not here to tell you that. That's not my job. My reviews are on Wednesday. You can go watch those there if you want to. No, this is about discussing the game, but I cannot avoid the parallels and similarities between this and Dishonored. The steampunk setting, the emphasis on stealth gameplay, the tremendously well done level design, the I hate to use this phrase because it's so overused, but the emergent gameplay, in other words, unscripted gameplay, and the overall idea of the vague, ill-defined overall setting, which provides the backdrop for the work. All of this is pretty similar. I suppose I'd say Dishonored's thing, all of this is similar to Thief's, but I mean, that's logical. Several people who worked on the Thief series had worked on Dishonored and Dishonored 2, so duh, right? But I just want to say that if you like Dishonored, Thief is like $5 on Steam without a sale. Now, of course, you're not going to see this when I'm saying this right now, but right now there's a Steam sale on where Thief is $1.74. It's not a joke. So, if you have to ask me my opinion if I think Thief is worth $2 or even $5, yes, 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 yes. Now, let's go ahead and discuss one other thing. Thief has aged surprisingly well. When I think of Thief, the last time I played Thief was, God, like in 2001 or 2002. It's been a while. It's been about 14 years. And it's been a while, and I usually assume that older games don't really age that well, just kind of as a general thing, because it's usually the exceptions that have aged well. You know, LTTP is a game I often point to as a game that's aged well, whereas Fallout 1, in my opinion, has not aged very well. I have difficulty going back and replaying the old Fallouts. So I was expecting to go back through this and basically slog through it and try to do my best to endure it, but I found myself really enjoying it, and I think there are two really big reasons why. First of all, the graphics are not the greatest. Let's just be 100% honest about it. But they're fairly typical for the era. They're what I like to mentally think of as second-gen 3D. First-gen 3D is all the first games that first did 3D. You know, Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64, you know, Ocarina of Time to a lesser extent. All those games, for the most part, haven't aged well graphically, and they just kind of look like crap now. FF7 is another good example of that. But second gen 3D is stuff that they started figuring out how to make things work a little bit. And while it certainly looks old, I can't personally say that I think it looks bad. And this is very important. Regardless of your aesthetic preference, it still is in service of gameplay. There's no moment where you're like, what am I looking at? Or what are those characters doing? You know, you can tell what you're looking at. It is visually distinct, which services gameplay, which makes it so that you can still enjoy the game. That's critical when it comes to, this is something I haven't really talked about that much because I haven't really discussed the whole aging well, aging poorly thing in full detail. But if it is my opinion that one of the best signs of graphics specifically aging well is what I just said. If you can actually tell what you're looking at and distinguish it. If you're having trouble, then maybe it hasn't aged too well. Obviously, there's a whole discussion, and it's a case-by-case basis thing. So I enjoyed replaying through Thief. It was great. There's a couple other reasons for that. I'm going to knock those out really quick. I'm actually not going to talk about gameplay that much because I kind of already did over in Dishonored. Seriously, there's really only two things really distinct in Thief. Excuse me, three things distinct in Thief from Dishonored. And I'll go ahead and hammer those out really quickly. First of all, the killing thing, or I should say third of all, Third of all, the killing thing. In Dishonored, it is a playstyle that you can go through and massacre, 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 massacre. And that is a valid playstyle. I suppose you could argue that that's a valid playstyle in Thief, I've never pulled that off. Combat is intentionally difficult. You are a guy with a sword, and you're going up against undead and armored knights and all sorts of other fun stuff. You're not supposed to fight through Thief. That is actually very much antithesis of the thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's one of the major things that's different. You are supposed to sneak through. If you get into a fight, it's because you screwed up, with a couple of exceptions. I mean, the final boss is literally a stealth mission, for God's sakes. You're not supposed to fight him. You're not supposed to fight the trickster. Oh, by the way, as ever, massive spoilers. I don't know why I keep having to say this, but just in case any viewers are popping in who've never seen me before and are just like, oh, here's a video about, insert game here. I'm going to try and make it a habit of saying this at the beginning of my videos. Massive spoilers. This is a rumination. I'm discussing the game in its whole entirety, and I can't do that without spoiling the crap out of it, okay? So, I'm going to try to get better about that little warning at the beginning of videos. So anyways, that's the third difference. The first difference is sound, and the second difference is shadows. Both of those probably are the biggest reasons why I enjoyed replaying Thief. So in Dishonored, the stealth thing, for those of you who haven't played it, is basically line of sight and vision. Like there's literally a cone of vision. You see it if you have the magic eye on, that they can see in, and it goes out to a certain distance. If you're in that, you're seen. If you're not, you're not. It's very simple. There is a sound mechanic to Dishonored, but it's much less than this one. To explain what I mean by that, in Dishonored, if you smack something or knock over something or hit some glass, it's called a loud sound. People will notice that. If you're moving near someone without sneaking, that's a loud sound. People will notice that. If you're sneaking around, that's a soft sound, which has an extremely minor but nevertheless existent effect on whether or not people will have the ability to notice you and how quickly they will notice you. The bar slowly filling kind of a thing. What Thief does differently is twofold. Number one, there's no magic eye in Thief. But that works because of the sound design. One of my biggest complaints about Dishonored 2, which I recently replayed recently played for the first time for the show in a premiere run, was my premiere run's on my other channel, by the way. You should go check it out. Was the sound design was. I mean, the sound design overall was good. There was good ambiance, there was good effects, and there was good music, and good voice acting. But the problem was I couldn't use sound to tell what I was doing or where I was going. If I didn't have the magic eye on, I was effectively blind. It would get to the point where I would be hearing footsteps as if they were right next to me from a guy who was upstairs. Or I'd hear two people talking, and I couldn't tell what direction they were coming from. Stuff like that. Thief does that properly. Because there is no magic eye ability, you can actually just sit and listen and tell, and get a pretty good idea of where they are, at least roughly, where they're going, if they're going away from you, if they're coming towards you, that kind of a thing. And it works much better, and is basically required, because again of the lack of the see-through walls thing. The sound design also is further informed because your sound, the sound you make, is also relevant. And I don't just mean smacking into things or whatever. I mean, I love this, different terrain sounds different. If you're walking on a rug, it's quieter. If you're walking on tile, tap, 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 and you're much more likely to be heard. And again, there's that layers of detection thing, from suspicion to detecting to outright hostility, right? Or excuse me, suspicion, searching, hostility. And then that isn't actually true for all enemies. Undead, for example, basically have nothing and aggression, and that's about it. I mean, that's an simplification, but you get the idea. So this all made it so that I was not only careful going through the game and could hear my way through the game, but I had to be cognizant of the sound I was making as I was going through the game. So my route would be informed by, okay, I'm okay right over here in the shadow, but there's no carpet on this particular room. There's a bunch of hardwood floor, and I need to get over there. So how do I do this? And I'd listen until the tapping patrol was as far away as possible, and I'd be like, okay, go! And they'd hear me, but I would have found a new safe spot, And there's other ways to do that, too. There are multiple ways to play through this. Well, I'll talk about the Trinity in a second, okay? I'm building up to that point. The other big thing is shadows. So again, in Dishonored, you've got the cone of vision, right? In Thief, it's more about lighting. about whether or not you are visible in the shadows. There's even this wonderful mechanic where if you have your sword out, metal, shiny, you're much more visible because they can see the light reflecting off of it, at least until you get the upgrade later. So you're sitting there and you're like, you don't want to have your sword out like that. You want to be as hidden as possible. And there are times, and I actually remember a distinct point where one of the guards started wandering up, chung chung, and I'm just sitting here in the shadows, like, oh God, please don't see me, please. I'm tense as hell in my chair, sitting right here, like, oh God, please don't see me, please don't see me, as he's like wandering over because I screwed up and I got suspicious state. So he wanders over, but he doesn't see me because I'm in the shadows. Now, I talked about this in my Dishonored 2 playthrough. It is my opinion that less realism works better for gameplay purposes when it comes to stealth gameplay. Metal Gear Solid showed this, the Dishonored game showed this, and the Thief game shows this. In other words, there are many times where you're doing something that isn't actually realistic. You shouldn't be able to just slip right by someone because they have no peripheral vision. You shouldn't be able to basically jump up and around someone in full view of them just because you happen to be far enough away that their vision doesn't counter it, you know. It's not realistic that way, but it is my opinion, that is better from a gameplay design perspective, and Thief does this. See, this is my opinion on how you do good stealth gameplay, and I talked about this in Dishonored 2, so forgive me for the repetition for those of you who saw this. Clearly defined rules of detection and hiding, and I already discussed several, the shadows, the different sound effects, you know, on what you can walk on, smashing into things to make noise. There's a few other things you get to. I'll talk about gadgets in a second. So clearly defined rules for hiding and sneaking and being detected. Clearly defined methods of trying to escape detection once you've been detected. And a clear indication of detection. These three things are, in my opinion, absolutely adamantly invaluable to good stealth gameplay. And the trilogy of games, or excuse me, that's actually true, but the Dishonored game, this game, and the other game I'm going to talk about in a minute, all do this pretty damn well. Let's talk about the gadgets really quick. I'm glancing at my notes here. The gadgets are, in my opinion, extremely important to the gameplay. Some people like to somewhat dismissively say that it's because everyone wants to play Batman. But truthfully, that's kind of true. It's just, it's not dismissive, nor do I think that's a bad thing. I talked about this in my Ratchet and Clank video. Gadgets are important to enjoyment in a game. You know why? Because they allow options. I know this sounds like a duh to several of you, but when you give a player a gun, or a bigger gun, or a bigger gun, or an AoE gun, that's not options. That's just upgrades. When you give a player an arrow that extinguishes light, you have given them an option to create a shadow to hide in, or to distract an enemy. When you give them something to make some moss show up, to make your footsteps quieter, you have given the player an option. You have not upgraded them. You have given them multiple paths to their victory. It's all about this thing. I've been talking about this so much lately. There's so many games I've been discussing lately that have the all roads lead to Rome game design philosophy. In brief, just in case you haven't seen my dozen other videos I've been talking about that lately, the idea is Thief is a linear game. You can start at point A, and it's mission-based, so you do a mission until you succeed the mission, then you do the next mission until you succeed the mission. It's very linear. But even though this is the path you're taking, in the mission, your options are all over the place. You can go basically wherever and do basically whatever. All that matters is point A, point B. The method in between, that's up to you. And that is one of the reasons that Thief and games like it are so enjoyable to me. Because if I go through, there's even a tooltip in Dishonored 2 and Dishonored 1 that say this. If you're going through and you're having trouble getting through this particular path, in most games that you're playing, that just means you need to get good. I hate that quote, but you get my point. That just means you're screwing up, or you're not high enough level, or you don't have enough upgrades, or you don't have enough ammo, or maybe you're just not having the reflexes to do it, or maybe your timing's off. Something is wrong, and you have to just try again, or do better, or whatever, in order to get through this path. In Thief, and Dishonored, and other games, all roads lead to Rome games, you think, okay, put that in the back burner, and then you leave that area, and you try to find another route. And most of the time, that works. There are very few times you are actually on the rails, in terms of gameplay. Now, That's very important for a game like Thief. That's very important for a stealth gameplay, and that's very important for gameplay in general. The feeling, because all of this service is something that I've argued for years and years and years as an awesome thing, giving you, the player, agency, making you responsible for what you're doing and your experience. Some designers recently, I'm not going to name his name, but it's the idiot involved in the next Assassin's Creed game, um, have said that they dislike linear gameplay because they feel it takes you out of the moment. You know, cutscenes being a bad thing, kind of a thing. Story. Who wants story in a game? Obviously, I disagree with this adamantly. It is worth noting, as I discussed during my lore week of that there are things to be said for player-dependent gameplay, and that's not what I'm talking about. This guy was just a prick and an elitist idiot. I think those people missed the point, though. I think those people played games like Thief when they were younger and loved how they get to decide their own story without realizing that Thief is still linear. Thief still has cutscenes. Thief still has story and structure to it. They just see I can go wherever and do whatever thing. That's an aspect of level design more than anything else, although the gadgets is very important to that, and the stealth gameplay is very important to that as well. And I cannot praise the level design in Thief enough, because they clearly looked at those rules, the detection, the rules, the escape, and the detection. They looked at those three aspects of gameplay, and all the gadgets you had available to you, and basically designed sections of each level to service that kind of gameplay. It's brilliant level design. It's so rare that I get to gush about level design as much as I have these last few months with Dishonored 2, Dishonored, and Thief. It's brilliant. It's through the roof. And that's where it's really at. Not, I'm just going to get rid of the story of the game. Because there is a story to Thief. Although you notice I haven't talked about it yet, and I'm still not going to talk about it. I wanted to get that out of the way, because I feel some developers and some players, for that matter, are just learning the wrong lessons here. But let's talk about the other thing, the final thing, gameplay-wise, I have to talk about. Oh, actually, really quick. Because people always ask me questions like this. My favorite level in Thief... Pause. I'm going to pause. You can pause if you want to guess it, or you can just guess it right now. Is the cathedral level. That's probably the really obvious answer. It was so wonderful to basically be like, okay, and then the cathedral hits, and it's like, oh, crap! The rules are still there, but they have been... let's call it slanted a little bit. So now you're at a severe disadvantage. It was really fun. No, let's talk about the other thing I want to talk about. It's the no-kill, no-scene gameplay thing. Or, I'm just going to call it what it is, precision gameplay. I can only speak from personal experience, because this is an opinion comment. But someone recently asked me, while I was going through the Dishonored 2, why am I not killing anybody, and why am I never being seen? I was doing a Ghost and a Mercy playthrough, if you're curious. And my response to that was, because it's fun. And then I talked a little bit more about it, like I'm about to talk to you about it. Because it's about precision. Let me relate in a weird way to racing games, especially Gran Turismo 3 and 4, okay? In those games, when you're going around on the Nürburgring or Spa, and you know those corners and you know those angles, and when you nail them just right, there's a degree of satisfaction from knowing I accomplished this. It is a sense of not only progression without it needing levels or a big flashing thing saying you leveled up or you got XY, because as you're going through that corner on repeat tries, you're not hitting it right, or you're getting better, or you're getting more precise, or you're going too late, or you're going too early. When you nail it, that's the ding. That's the level up. You have sufficiently progressed your personal skill to precisely hit that corner just right. And it's very satisfying to have that feeling of, yes, I nailed that. That type of gameplay is what I enjoy about the the no scene, the lots of stealth, the no scene and the no kill style of gameplay. Because I feel like I have actually accomplished something that was very difficult and required a lot of precision, a lot of reworking, a lot of effort, and I didn't need some kind of artificial value saying, oh, you have reached X marker now. I just did it. Do keep in mind I'm not saying that there's anything necessarily wrong with level systems, except for games that exploit that in order to try to make you feel like you're making progress when you're not. Hate that crap. And of course I'm always against grind, but we're not going to get into that right now. Point being, I didn't feel like I was grinding in any of these type of games, especially going through Thief. I felt like I was getting better, practicing, as opposed to grinding. To define the two, obviously, I define grind as the repeat stuff that is boring. You know, stuff that you don't want to do. bad grind, as some of my viewers call it, marbly meat. By contrast, practicing is slowly trying to improve your craft, whatever it is you're doing. It's the difference between repetition and practice, actually. No matter how many times, I know this is a weird example, but no matter how many times you say, make your bed, you're not really getting better at making your bed, are you? Even though you do it, well, I do it on a daily basis. I don't know how many you do. But I'm not like some expert at making the bed, even though, if you think about it, I've done that several thousand times at this point. Because I'm not practicing. I'm just like, all right, make the bed, done. No effort on my behalf is being put into getting better at it. That's grind, basically, from a game design perspective. It's like, all right, I just have to mash A long enough, or I just need to beat enough of these enemies or gather enough gold in order to progress. By contrast, practice is, okay, I'm going to go through this level. Okay, he saw me. All right, so I know he's there, and I know I have to be a little more careful about what I'm walking on. Okay, nope, I was too quick. I was getting impatient. And I'm trying to improve my gameplay because I want to. Because I enjoy that feeling of satisfaction from nailing the corner just right, from hitting that precision mark. Now, let me look at my notes here really quick. Let's talk about the trilogy I mentioned before. I call this the trilogy. I've actually mentioned this before, but I don't think I've really discussed this that much. So, a lot of people talk about Half-Life as the game that basically rescued us from the dregs of Doom clones and whatnot. But I think that's underselling it. Half-Life, first of all, really pushed forward game design in many ways. But when you think about it, Half-Life's still a shooter. It was a very intelligent, very well done FPS. There were a couple of platformy sections. There was some really great story design and presentation of story throughout it. And there was some great level design. But it was still, you're going through a place, shooting your way through, right? It's just they reconstructed that to show that you could do that and still make a great game out of it, rather than just, endless stupid maps of stupid, basically, which is the problem we were having at the time. The other two games, okay, so the reason I bring up Half-Life and the other two games I'm about to bring up is, it is my opinion, based on just my observation of gaming history and having been around for most of gaming history, that gaming design goes like this. There's like a spike of innovation or creativity or design, and then other people scramble to do that, and so it keeps going up for a bit as people refine and work on the process, and then it kind of levels out as people just get to the point of bullet point syndroming. I've talked about that before. The specific thing, and then someone else comes up with another idea, and there's another spike, and then it kind of levels out, and then spike, and then it levels out. There's probably an inevitable end to this process, but in my opinion, we haven't reached it yet. We're still having spikes, even in the modern era. There's some great games that have come out in the last couple of years. I like to point to Super Mario Brothers, for example, as a big spike in gameplay, and I'm not going to get into the details of that one. But there were 3 games that came out in the mid to late 90s that were big spikes for PC gaming. Finally going to tell you what they are. Half-Life, Thief, you probably guessed that one, and anybody? Deus Ex. Which is funny, because several of the people who worked on Thief then, thanks to issues I'll go into in a moment, left to go work on Deus Ex at Ion Storm. All 3 of these games really pushed forward game design, especially in the PC market, and they did something very important. There's another game I should mention in here, Metal Gear Solid. All of these games came out within a small band of time and did something extremely important from a purely marketing perspective. They showed the people who make decisions, the corporate people, that games that are not the norm still can sell. Metal Gear Solid sold like crazy. So did Half-Life, so did Deus Ex, and all of these, and so did Thief, actually. And all of these games proved that it was now financially viable to try new things in game design, when at the time we were kind of pushing into a rut, because, like, oh, well, you want to make a game about sneaking around and not killing anybody? That's not going to sell. And the funny thing is, that sounds like a joke, me saying that, but there were executives, and quite a few people, actually, not executives, just game designers, at the time who had the exact same mentality. Making a game, making a shooter, about running around not killing anybody, that's not going to work. And yet it did. So, I mention all 3 of these games, too, because Half-Life especially is probably one of the biggest reasons why Thief got made. Now, I don't want to give too much credit to Valve on that one, but what I mean by that let's rewind a little bit, okay? So, the original game was something called Better Red Than Undead. I had to look at the name of that in my notes because it's such a dumb title. It was all about, USSR, zombies, shoot down the zombies. Now, the thing is, excuse me, it wasn't going to be just another shooter. Even back in its starting phases, Thief was actually going to be a game that tried to push envelopes. They were actually going to have a tried and true, excuse me, the opposite of a tried and true. They were going to have a completely experimental faction system involved, where you could actually try and support one side, which would change your standing with another. Now, if you don't understand, that was kind of a big deal back then. That's the kind of thing that wasn't really done. And doing that in a first-person shooter in the era of Doom and Quake clones, that was unheard of. That was shot down pretty quickly. So they kind of warped it and moved it, and several people worked on the idea. Warren Spector actually ended up working on the Dark Camelot idea, which was their next big idea. Now, Warren Spector himself has said flat out, I didn't actually contribute that much to the project. I don't know how much of that is true and how much of it is just him being humble. But Dark Camelot was going to be a weird inversion of the Camelot mythos, the idea of Merlin being and Arthur was going to be this evil tyrant, and you're going to go through that and whatnot. And they kind of started working a little bit on the gameplay. A lot of this was done on paper, of course, as most game design is. But it reached an interesting point, a critical point, actually, where there was a guard that people had to get by. And several of the testers and developers working on this kept noting how much fun it was to, wait until the guard was looking over there and zip by him. And several people involved at Looking Glass Studios Austin started pushing for the idea of, or not in Looking Glass Studios, just Looking Glass Studios, period, excuse me, started pushing the idea of, that's kind of cool, why don't we focus on that instead? And so the project started taking, no pun intended, more focus on the avoiding combat rather than approaching combat, which kind of helps differentiate this from, for example, Half-Life. And then some things went down. I'm not going to go into the details because I imagine, as much as I love talking about economics and finances and the realities of what trade and how it functions, I imagine if I got run down to the really nitty-gritty, a lot of you would be really, really bored. All we're going to say is that Looking Glass Studios was tanking financially. Really, really badly. If I'm being blunt, the only reason Looking Glass Studios didn't cease to exist as an entity is because of some accounting snafus and probably some fraud, but I'm not going to accuse anyone of that. But my point is, based on the numbers I've seen and so the information of the reports, granted these are from the 90s, they should have shut down. They were not financially soluble. And it is worth noting that they did a lot of things to try and stay above board. Looking Glass Studios Austin was completely shut down. Over half of the staff were laid off. There were talks about just closing down the boards to the building and trying to sell off the building to make themselves solvent. There were a lot of financial problems. And that was happening in the middle of production on what had become Thief, the Dark Project, because everyone liked that whole sneaking by gameplay thing. I gotta be blunt, I'm amazed this game got made at all, based on what I've seen of the finances of the time. And there was another really, 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 really big problem. The AI was dog crap. I hate to say that, but everyone involved, all the people, all the interviews say the exact same thing. The AI was unsalvageable, is a direct quote. So, one of the people involved looked at that, one of the new designers who was pulled on looked at that and said, all right, I'm going to try and see what I can do with this. And for the better part of about a full year, spent time completely, basically taking a tiny portion of the existing code and trying to rework it into a completely new AI script, while everyone else was working on the rest of the game. I want to give huge credit to the people involved in this. I've talked before about the idea. I talked about this just recently, or actually in the future, from your perspective, for the Witness Rumination I did, or will do. It's your future. And, sorry, I just thought of a dumb joke. I'm not going to do it. I gave credit to Jonathan Blow for, I think it's his name, for his obvious care. The fact that he obviously cared about putting out a good product. You know how you can tell when a developer or a coder, probably, high chance probability, really cares about putting out a good product? When they're not sure if they're still employed from day to day, and are working in an extremely stressful environment where the company they're working for might shut down quite literally any day and still come into work and put forth the kind of work that went into making Thief. A lot of fat was cut. Some of it's unfortunate. I think it would have been cool if they'd added, but a lot of new gadgets were cut. Multiplayer was going to be a thing. That was cut completely. That's just the reality of how that works. And they had to get really creative. And this is one of those sad realities. In an ideal world, you'd think, okay, walk up to the Looking Glass Studios people, developers, and say, here's a lot of money and no deadline. Well, maybe like a deadline. I don't want you to be working on this for 10 years, but not a restrictive deadline. You don't have 11 months to make this game. Like 3 years maybe. It would depend. In an ideal world, that would be the best way to foster the best game design. And Lord knows there is a lot to be said for that kind of philosophy. Yet history has proven time and time again the opposite is true. It's the developers who are working on a shoestring budget, basically doing it because they really want to, and are forced to get creative. I hate that because it's such a wrongness, if I'm just being blunt, in the world, that having nothing enforces creativity, that it's when you're at your worst and when you don't have access to the tools or available or the resources, that's when you make the really good stuff. But that's true. That's been true over and over and over again in real life and in the creation of our fictional works. So I guess that's real life and real life. But my point is, like, real life construction projects, real life innovations, and innovations in game design, movie design, book design, writing, stories, etc. All of that has been pushed forward by lack. I hate that. That's so wrong. But Thief is another example of that. These people had nothing. These people had nothing. This was the big success story for Looking Glass Studios. Their best financial hit ever. Huge critical acclaim. As I said, provided one of the cornerstones of the next era of gaming. Part of the trilogy of games that came out that pushed, or quadrilogy really, of games that just pushed gaming into the next era. These people can look up back on this and say they're, with pride, what they made in this game. They can say, I contributed to gaming history. And it sold well. But God, it must have sucked when they were making it, But anyway, so yeah, they cut lots and lots of features. They cut the multiplayer. They trimmed it down. It took, like I said, it took the better part of a freaking year to make the AI serviceable. And by the time that was done, the AI was in place, and if you've played this game, the AI is literally integral. Without the complex, and at the time, unheard of levels of complexity in the AI, this game would have never succeeded as much as it did. Now, I say unheard of. That's actually not 100% true, because I have to bring Half-Life back into the story one more time. Because Half-Life is probably one of the biggest reasons why this game got made. Credit goes to Metal Gear Solid. Credit goes to Deus Ex, which I think actually came out later. They were basically being developed alongside each other. But Half-Life was a huge hit, financially and critically. So the company was willing to let Thief keep going, even though financially it probably would have been the right decision at the time to pull the plug. Hate to say that, but it's true. But it helped him to keep going financially, and it helped him to keep going personally, because the people involved had actually said, there was a big morale boost. This is doable. We can make this happen. And that AI was a big part of that. Because, again, Half-Life showed innovative new design in AI. That was actually one of the big points of Half-Life, one of its big selling points. I'm sure a lot of you don't even remember this anymore. But at the time it was like, now we have an AI which can actually interact with and not just like automatically know where you are and automatically go towards you and automatically shoot you. They can actually act and react and run and retreat and do flanking and actual tactics, and they might not detect you immediately, just all sorts of stuff like that. There were some real pushes forward. So then the game got made. Big success. Woo. How long have I been talking? I've just been talking about the gameplay and the making of. I don't have much to say about the story. I want to talk about Garrett a little bit. I want to talk about the themes of the work. But most of the rest of what I could say is actually going to be kind of repetition from Dishonored, even though this is a completely different setting. But think about it for a moment. This game has a better reason to have that approach to setting building than Dishonored did. If you don't know what I mean by that, in Dishonored and Dishonored 2, you see like this little pinprick. Now, it's like looking through a keyhole. Okay? You look through the keyhole and you see a little bit of the room beyond, and you can see bits and pieces, and from those bits and pieces, you can infer there's a whole room there. Lots of details and lots of intricacies and whatnot. But all you can see is this. Thief does that, but it makes more sense in Thief. And you know why? Because Garrett doesn't give a crap. Garrett this is kind of a lower deck sort of a thing. Garrett is way down here on the scale, even though he's an amazing thief, at least in the first game, I should say. Obviously, you learn more about the setting in the future games. But Garrett is just a guy, basically, who doesn't want to be part of the Great Orders, who doesn't want to know more about the world. We know there's some big war that the city is raging. We know that there's, advances in technology and well, pseudo magic that are being pushed forward. We know that there's, the infrastructure of the city and the establishment of the currency and all that fun stuff. But all of that is periphery. We're down here, focused on our mission, which is stealing stuff and not getting caught doing it. Now, obviously, the main plot does kind of shove its way into Garrett's life, but even then, the biggest reason why Garrett decides to help out, reluctantly, I might add, is because the world being destroyed is bad for him because he lives in it. It's literally a selfish motivation the whole way through, and I don't mean that as a negative thing, although if I'm being honest, Garrett's a pretty bad person, all things considered. Not evil, but he's, well, let me put it to you this way. I was recently asked to define my interpretations of the 9 alignments on the D&D alignment chart. Garrett is the definition of neutral evil in my book, and one of the reasons why I think it's one of the harder character types to write, because he's not a horrible person. He's not, stabbing babies. But he is very self-interested to the point of exclusion of others. He is very selfish. He is very greedy. And, as I mentioned before, he really doesn't give a damn. He does have a little bit of unique charm to him because there's a degree of enjoyment to be had in a character who is facing, the great cosmic horrors are coming from beyond. It's like, I don't want to deal with this. God, go away, go away. What? No, I'm busy. I'm busy. Leave me alone. You could call it the refusal to call, but it's a little different than that because it's not like, the refusal to call in the classic hero's journey. It's more like, I don't care about the call. Garrett literally only gets involved because he has to, because he's the only one good enough to be able to deal with the trickster. He is apathetic, and I love that, as weird as that sounds, because of its presentation. It's a very tightrope balance that Garrett walks. He's also very generally unflappable, which I really like. It's part of that apathy thing, because it's easy to be the kind of person who just doesn't care. Or excuse me, it's easy to be the type of person who doesn't react to things when you just don't care about them. It's like, oh my god, if this happens, these thousands of people will die. Garrett would just be like, yeah, okay, whatever. The only time, to my knowledge, in the first game that he reacts with anything other than the general unflappable air of, yeah, whatever, uncaring apathy, is when Victoria, rips out his damn eye. By the way, great visual and audio design on that. You can tell they don't have to say it. There's no screaming, but it's very apparent the way they present that how terrified Garrett is, being shown this one little keyhole of just how worse things are and can be. It's a nice touch. I also find myself wondering if one of the biggest reasons why Garrett is this way is because of the Keepers. Now, the Keepers, I don't have much to say about the Keepers, even regarding the overall setting. I do know most of this story from the future games, obviously, but I'm trying to focus myself just on this game. But regardless, the Keepers are actually, there's not much to say about them. They're here to keep balance, even amongst themselves. They are the Watchers, who watches the other Watchers. They're here to try and make sure that the balance between the two sides of things, progression and I guess, I'm not sure what to call that. I suppose environmentalism need to be kept in balance. And I say it that way because it's often slanted of order towards chaos, but I don't agree with that. But I'll get to that in a moment. So the Keepers tend to be very accepting of pacifism. It's kind of a Jedi Order kind of a thing. They're just like, yeah, whatever. We're cool with just chilling and not really getting involved. I have a feeling, just a gut reaction, that one of the biggest reasons why Garrett became so apathetic, became so cynical, and just decided to just care about himself, was because the Keepers had all this knowledge and all this ability and don't really use it. And after a while, that's just got to grate on you as a person. But now I got two directions to go into. So the let's talk about the order versus chaos thing. The characters in the game, I should say, try and make it feel like it's order versus chaos. But if you really pay attention, and admittedly this isn't quite apparent in the first game, it becomes more apparent in the second game, the Metal Age, neither side is good. Neither of them are good guys. In fact, both of them are pretty bad, the Chaos and the Order side. And both of them project the other as what I just said. The Chaos side calls them the Order side calls them the Chaos. But if you really step back and look at it from a third-person perspective here, which is easy to do because you're playing as Garrett, who is very much not involved personally, what you're looking at is progression versus environmentalism, like I said earlier. That might not be the perfect word for that. But the progressiveness is the point of the order side. They want to have civilization, society, culture. They want inventions. You know, this whole steampunk setting is mostly because of the Hammerites and what they've done. And later on, the Mechanists. And even the Mechanists are so extreme. And granted, there's some reasons and they get kind of... But even the Mechanists are all about pushing things forward. They just go a little bit too far, too progressive. It's not about making things work in one unified line. And there are negatives to that, even ignoring any, extremism, even ignoring the personal vendettas and the political power and all the other crap that comes along with that. Civilization has many benefits. But when you really think about it, it also has many detriments, too. My sister and I actually had a lengthy discussion about this about a year ago. I still remember it, though. About I was mentioning something that was a detriment of civilization, and I was mentioning it in a fairly derogatory, negative tone because it recently cropped up and pissed me off. I guess it was actually about 2 years ago now that I'm thinking about it. It was a while ago. And she pointed out, well, what's the alternative? Imagine if you didn't have the framework for that existing. Wouldn't that be worse? And we got into this whole discussion because civilization does come with great benefits. And great detriments. That's part of what progression means. That's part of what civilization means. It's part of the framework, the societal fabric, if you will. So even ignoring the corruption, the mechanists, and all that other fun stuff, their side is kind of more leaning towards civilization, good and bad. The other side is also kind of good and bad. It's more about being in touch with, in tune with, and connected with your environment. That's why I call it environmentalism. Because, obviously, if you're paying attention, the two of these ideas married together is probably the best path forward. Because if you overtake from your setting, from your environment, that's a bad thing. That's such a bad thing, I don't even feel the need to discuss it. But if you try to find some kind of balance point, reseeding the crops you harvest, reseeding the trees so those regrow, trying not to genocide a species of animal, for consumption purpose, that kind of a thing, and taking from the land as kind of a thing. There are pluses and there are minuses to that, just like the previous civilization thing I just mentioned. And I like that portrayal of the two. It's just a shame that in this game we see so much more of the negative side of the chaos side of things, because the trickster sounds kind of like this when he talks, and it's actually kind of hard to hear him sometimes and understand what he's saying. And he's basically trying to, well, everyone says he's trying to destroy the world, but what they mean is he's trying to destroy civilization. He's basically trying to wreck the city and everything else and bring everything back down to the agrarian society point, because that's what he thinks should be. Now, if you're paying attention, the villain of the first game is someone who is an extremist on the environmentalist side, and the villain of the second game is an extremist who's on the progressive side. Do I even need to keep making my point there? But I do like that. I do like the presentation of both sides as basically bad, mostly because of adherence, refusal to compromise with the other. I mean, the pagans are shoved over into a corner of society and said, piss off. But at the same time, the Hammerites are just as much a part of the problem with corruption and the bribes and blackmail, all that crap that happens in the city as anyone else is. Goods and bads. I like that. I'm checking my notes, but I don't think I have anything else to really talk about. Yeah, I guess that's actually it. I hope you've enjoyed. Lord knows I did. And I will see you guys next time.